Good evening and welcome to our Committee of the Whole meeting for Monday, February 15th, 2021. In this meeting, we will have a request to extend suspension of paid parking in municipal lots. And Director Rodenbeck has a short update for us on the parking situation from back in December. So Director Rodenbeck, the floor is yours.
Sure. As people may recall, back in December, staff did, when a request came before, staff went through various options. So the mayor, I think, just wanted me to just talk through what those options were again and just remind people. So you may recall that staff at the time talked about, obviously one option is just to continue with the paid parking. And what we saw as the pros of that was, one, it's following the parking study recommendations. Two, it was helping to solve some of the problems on College Hill with some of the residential parking. And it was also helping the parking fund to allow for funding some parking improvements. But we saw that the negative, of course, is that it was maybe being perceived as a negative impact to businesses during the pandemic. The second option we talked about was, obviously suspending parking for a short period of time. And we did see that. I think some pros to that was that, free parking in lots may help continue to move owners, employees out of the prime parking spots on the street, that we can get them into the lots. Also would see as perceived as a, positive impact to businesses during pandemic. But the things that we saw were kind of the cons to that option is, I think sometimes it gets confusing. It's, are we paying for parking? Are we not paying for parking? How do we get the message out? So it kind of adds to that confusion. I think we're also worried that owners, employees, residents will continue to consume then those long-term spots in the lots. I think College Hill may have some issues creep up again about how there'll be residential complexes who are close to those lots will start using the spaces in the lots again. And we also talked about that there is expenses, of course, going on every month in the parking fund, and without revenue, it's hard to offset those costs. The third thing we kind of talked about as an option is whether we want to just permanently remove paid parking lots. And I think one of the things that we saw out of that is, if we see that there's not a tolerance for paid parking, then we should probably just pull the pay stations out, kind of reduce our costs, because there are monthly charges to that every month, that at this point, should we just decide that we're not willing to do that, there's not a tolerance for that, so let's just, probably better to stop now than to continue to have the debate. We were continuing to spend dollars on implementation, signage, and all that, so we kind of looked at that we could just stop doing that if we don't want to have paid parking. Now, of course, on the con side, we looked at, obviously by doing that, it's going to be a loss of parking revenue, and we're still going to have enforcement costs. So there would not be revenue to help offset that. So, we talked about that eventually, really what that means is it will be property taxes that will supplement parking at some point. We also talked about, what are we going to do about parking permits? Then how do we kind of factor that in to that equation? Again, I mentioned earlier, I think we're going to see problems with parking on College Hill and those residential complexes next door, that's going to creep back up. And I think it also just told us too that if there's not a tolerance for paid parking, should we really even continue to have discussions then about ramps or additional lots if there's not, again, an interest for paid parking? So those were just kind of the three options that we went through and talked through back in December, the last time we had this request. So I think it was just to remind everybody kind of what those options were.
Okay, thank you, Director Rodenbeck. So tying back to that December meeting, the council decided to have a parking fee moratorium in downtown and College Hill that would last until April 1st. And so this discussion tonight is about the time ahead that would be needed in order to do the education, the change out if the moratorium is going to end. Staff needs to know that sooner rather than later. So that's why it's up for discussion tonight. As Director Rodenbeck said, we have a couple options here. If council doesn't bring a motion forward, then it's automatically that moratorium is going to expire, and then paid parking will be back in effect. The council can also have a motion to extend short-term, so maybe another few months based on the pandemic and decreased level of parking needs downtown right now. Or it can extend long-term, so like months to a year. But from Director Rodenbeck, my understanding was that if that's the case, if we're looking at a year or more, then does it make sense to pull the equipment out entirely? So those are three possible options. There might be more based on motions, but I would certainly open it up for council discussion about like any questions that you have additionally for data or information from staff before we move to motions. So thoughts? Yes, Councilmember DeBoer.
How much money have we invested so far in the pay station, and how much is the monthly charge that you're talking about?
So up to this point, we have actually spent almost $200,000, but that's on the 2 studies and the implementation. So I guess I don't have the breakdown of the actual pay stations, but we do have costs that we were looking at, that if our monthly charges, that if we would continue to do that for a year and not use them, that's about a $20,000 cost that we would have for a year of not using them. So that's why we would look at, is it smarter to just pull them back out? Because again, sitting there for a year, are they going to become obsolete anyway? Are there going to be technical issues with them? Plus, we're going to spend $20,000 on something that's not getting used.
How much does it cost to pull them out?
We haven't asked that yet. And we have no idea if we can get any kind of credit for them. I mean, I think at this point, we weren't quite ready to ask that question because we didn't know what route we were going.
I was just curious.
Yeah, so it's roughly about $1,600 a month. Ish.
Yeah.
Other questions, comments? Councilor Cyrus.
I'd like to know what the downtown area, how they feel. The things that I've heard back from them are their premium spots are, of course, on Main Street, where they'd like to have a little bit of enforcement, but they'd also like to have the back lots be free. They have the biggest stake in this, and I would like to see them really weigh in on what they want so we can move ahead, not just say that it's COVID, but say this is what our downtown businesses want, and that's what we want to try and help them do. COVID is just one thing that's happening right now, but we need to look at the long term and what those businesses want. I'd like to have them call in, or I'll get together with them and see. What I've heard so far was they like the suspension on the big lots, but the premium lots that are down in the front, they should have a little bit of enforcement. So maybe they'll want to make 4-hour lots in the back with just the marking the tires instead of going through the different computer things and use your phone. When I go down there, I like to just park and not be hassled and have to get out my phone and try and pay. And I think that's the way a lot of people are. So the stakeholders down there are really the ones that should help us decide what they want to do. I don't have a problem with giving them a little more extension, but eventually we should decide what we're going to do. And they're the stakeholders who pay the taxes down there, and I'd really like to have them involved in the answer. That's all.
Director Rodenbeck, could you comment on the letter that we received from Community Main Street and what their request was?
So the letter in the packet, I think they were asking to go through, my understanding was to April of next year. But I have not personally talked to Community Main Street, so I don't know what their thoughts are. So I don't know if they're on tonight, that they can provide comments.
Okay, so it looks like we do have Community Main Street. Is that Kim Bear with us? So Ms. Bear, would you be able to provide some insight from Community Main Street for us tonight?
Mayor,
Yes, go ahead, Kim.
can you hear me? Okay, thanks. And just like we requested in the letter, I mean, we've had multiple conversations. Our board members have had multiple conversations with businesses downtown who are just really trying to survive at this point. And so their request has been what we asked for, just to take we can't implement the paid parking right now in the circumstances that are surrounding us. I understand that COVID is hopefully a short term, but it's already longer than we had anticipated. And these businesses are just asking for a little bit of leeway in regards to this.
Okay, thank you, Ms. Bear.
Mayor,
Yeah, go ahead, Councilmember Miller.
for clarity's sake, their letter says suspension of the paid parking system, and then on the agenda, it's suspension of paid parking in the municipal lots. This is, I believe, what we put the moratorium on before, but are we talking the same? Is everybody talking about the same thing here?
I guess I just assumed it was the lots because that's the only paid parking there is. I mean, streets are free, so I guess I thought they were the same.
Yep.
Yes, Councilmember Harding.
I have a question. Is it possible for Community Main Street, since they're on the line, to elaborate on what the consensus is downtown? Do people want paid parking? Do people not want paid parking? This is obviously a debate in many cities. To Dave's question, is there a consensus on Community Main Street at all?
You still with us, Ms. Bear?
Sorry. Yes, I was trying to decide if I was still muted. Simon, to your question, the consensus would be obviously nobody wants to pay for parking, and that's what their feeling is. I think that the question is about, the parking study was done when we had a parking problem. We don't have a parking problem anymore because we had a pandemic. So it's really a struggle between, we would love to have a parking problem again because that would mean that people were downtown. So long term, I can't answer that question because nobody can see outside of this window that we're in.
Fair enough. Just to piggyback on what I just said, and I'll let it go. I think that when we get out of the pandemic, which will happen, we will have a parking problem again, which will be a good thing, like Ms. Bear said. So I don't feel like it's wise of us to abandon the paid parking. It's more than likely inevitable as Cedar Falls grows. So I think extending it is worth looking at personally, just to support the businesses.
Okay, would you like to put forward a motion then for extension for a certain amount of time, and then we can just...
Sure. I'd motion to extend it to August 1st. I know it's not the full year, but I'd rather revisit it earlier and talk about it again than make it a full year and then have to go back on it. So I'd rather talk about it more. So motion to extend the suspension of paid parking in municipal lots until August 1st of 2021.
Okay. That's been motioned and seconded. Additional discussion of August 1st, so 4 months from the current expiration date. Yes, Councilmember DeBura.
I'm curious, if you extend this for 4 more months, there'll be 4 more months of no more parking fee or finances coming in. So the cost of the machines and enforcement of enforcing the on-street parking, how does that come out of the budget? How do we pay for that?
So you may recall that in my presentation in December, I had talked about, I think we only had 1 month where we had the actually pay stations going. And so they were generating, I think for that month was around $5,000. And so what we were looking at, but the costs, including those technology costs that we talked about, enforcement, we were running about $18,000 a month for expenses. So obviously there was going to be a loss with the revenue, of at least $13,000. There's for sure going to be $18,000. You may also recall that at one time we had about $900,000 in our parking fund. It is now down to $700,000 because of all those things that we talked about, the studies and the pay station and continuing to do implementation. things. And so that's why I was saying eventually, so for now, those losses will keep coming out of the parking fund. But I think it also shows you at some point, it will be property taxes or the general fund that will have to support the parking fund because it won't be able to continue to pay for itself. Because my assumption is people want to keep enforcement. You know, even though we're getting rid of lot, they still want to see enforcement going. So again, there's still costs to that.
Councilmember Harding.
Question, since this does have to do with the pandemic, is there a way that we could reimburse that money through COVID funds from the state or the federal government?
I don't know of any such program that we could collect on those.
Okay.
Mr. Mayor?
Yes, Councilmember Cruz, go ahead.
Thank you. I'm assuming that all of the enforcement of the 3-hour parking areas and other such spots besides the parking lots are still being enforced as they were pre-COVID?
Yes, I think we only had that little short window where we weren't doing enforcement at all too. But no, we've been doing enforcement during this whole thing.
Okay. I think the August 1st date sounds reasonable at this point to get us out there where the vaccines can start kicking in and people feel comfortable returning to normal. And that seems to be a trajectory that I've been hearing.
Okay, other
My
thoughts?
2 cents
Councilmember Dara?
worth.
Just a couple questions. I actually know the answer, but I'd like to hear it again. Why did we do a parking study and spend all the money in putting these things in place? Was it just something the city felt we should do, or was there a request for a parking study, or how'd that work?
And we did have a request by Community Main Street to do the study. And you may kind of even go a little farther back. I think we did a kind of informal study at one point, and then I think at some point there was a request that came forward from Community Main Street to do a formal study, and so then we did it at that point, and then obviously wanted to do the same for College Hill.
And as Councilman Hardy said, we did the study because of a good problem that we had, and that's a lot of people needing to find places to park downtown. I guess I can support going until August, or even if the pandemic is raging for whatever amount of time it is. But I do believe that the city's gone to great expense to put together a good parking study with good parameters that was asked for by businesses downtown, so that to me, it should be known that whenever we reinstitute the parking requirements, it will be based upon that study, and that's when the pandemic's over, the parking study is employed. I just think that nobody wants to pay for it, but everybody wants the business, and it's part of doing business. And the city's paid good money to have the study done in good faith, and I think we as a council should just make it clear that when the moratorium's over, we're implementing a parking study as it's presented.
Any other final thoughts or discussion on the extension of paid parking in municipal lots, suspension until August 1st? Okay, seeing none, then it's been motioned and seconded. All in favor, say aye.
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 Opposed?
Nay.
Okay, so 6 aye, 1 nay. And so that does pass. And next steps for this, does it need to come through to council in a regular meeting for extension? Or is this the determining vote for it?
Well, so I assume we would look at it the same way. We assume it will expire unless something comes back before, and I'll probably say July 1st, kind of like now, because if things are going to start back up, we kind of need that time to get the message out and get it going. Now, one of the things I did just want to clarify, Mayor, so we're talking about all municipal lots, College Hill included. Correct? I think that was the motion.
That was what was in the motion, or request to extend suspension of paid parking
Yeah.
in municipal lots.
Yeah.
So that'll be until August 1st then. And that is all we had for this section. So I will entertain a motion to adjourn.
Second.
The motion is seconded. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? We are adjourned, and we'll pick up again at 7 p.m. Thank you very much.